Hi everyone, this is just an update from my last video, which I posted here on LinkedIn about getting prepared to leave Australia. I've received a response from the Australian government, and the response is it's a rejection. That I cannot leave. So I will keep trying. Very disappointed because I'll fill you in quite briefly. My reason for leaving the country is to represent the education industry. That's what I do. This is not for tourism. I don't plan to come back this year, so it's definitely not a holiday. Yes, the plan was to start traveling as early as the end of next month, and to destinations that are really not tourist destinations at all, on behalf of colleges, to help them with partnerships to get things happening on the ground, to help an industry here that has been crippled. Alongside tourism and hospitality, the education industry is in really dire straits. So I'm doing my bit. To receive a rejection is, it's insulting on a personal level, because it's the government telling me that the type of job that I do is not important enough. And the excuse for that is that it puts other Australians at risk. Really? Even though I'm not coming back. So let's think about that. So leaving the country with no intention of returning anytime this year. So the chances of me being a threat to any other country, well, that's up to that country to decide. And where I am right now here in Canberra, which, there's no problem at all in terms of COVID, but that's really not up to the country that I'm leaving to decide that. So I totally understand the reverse of that, limitations on being able to come back, and it's very difficult to come back, even with the limited number of people that can come back. It's very limited. There, of course, is the quarantine for 2 weeks, and I think everybody understands that. That's normal procedure for most countries. But even without that in place, let's say you could leave Australia legally, and it's up to you when you return. I don't think that would encourage tourism, because no one's going to leave the country knowing that, let's say if I leave the country to go to the Middle East or Europe, and it's a $1,000 airfare, it's going to cost almost $10,000 to come back. So in some cases, it's as much as 10 times more to come back straight away. All right, so that automatically deters a lot of people from traveling for tourism. Now let's look at this. Countries that stop their citizens from traveling abroad. The only country that comes to mind is North Korea. I can't think of any other country. At the very beginning of the pandemic, I think there might have been a few other countries, such as Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and maybe Lithuania, that had temporary measurements in place, but no longer do. Correct me if I'm wrong, if you're from that country. But as far as I know, Australia is the only country that has this very draconian rule. And for those people who say, well, shouldn't you stay where you are in order to keep everybody else safe? Well, yet I see the point, but let's remember that this is not for selfish reasons. It's not me traveling abroad for leisure. Okay, so this is work, and it's not just a job where, I'm looking for business. This is an industry, as I said before, that has been severely penalised by the fact that borders are closed. So we all have to do our bit. I'm not Superman, but we all have to do our bit to repair that before the borders reopen. And let's not forget that when the borders reopen here in, say, 6 months, there will be a floodgate of millions and millions of people, Australians, who will want to travel for leisure, not for important business. and I'll have to compete for those people, and I might not be able to fly at that time. So I'm trying to get in early. It's really not a selfish reason to leave, but I'm being unselfish by not coming back. So I will be a problem for wherever I go, and it's up to that country to decide whether or not they'll have me, right? Okay. Most of the people who I'm connected with on LinkedIn, for example, about 5,000 people are not in Australia. So let me just dispel a few myths for you here. Australia's doing a really good job with the handling of the pandemic. Be careful of what you see on the media. Let me do a really quick comparison. New Zealand, our neighbour. I've got some figures here. Okay, here we go. Let's start with Australia. Yes, these numbers are very small when we compare them to some parts of Europe, North America, etc. But this is not about comparing those countries. Let's just compare these two places for a while, okay? Let's start with Australia. So number of cases, just under 30,000, 29,000 to be more exact, just under 1,000 deaths. Okay, so that's not bad, 1,000 deaths, not 10,000, 100,000, 1,000 deaths. Let's go over to New Zealand. Firstly, the population. Australia's population is just over 25 million. New Zealand's population is just over 5 million. All right, so let's do the maths. New Zealand, the population is 5 times smaller than Australia. All right, let's go back to those cases. So the number of cases in Australia is just under 30,000 or 29,000, let's say. Number of deaths, just under 1,000. Let's go over to New Zealand, a population 5 times smaller. Number of cases, about 2,300. Number of deaths, 25. Okay, now, if Australia is doing as well as our neighbour, New Zealand, then for a country 5 times the size in population, we should have a number of deaths of just around 11,000. A number of cases of around 11,000 and a number of deaths about 125. Now, I know, being here, especially being in Melbourne, one of the most brutal lockdowns anywhere in the world had last year, that most of the cases and most of the deaths were from a result of a second outbreak in Melbourne. So without Melbourne, the numbers go right down, all right? But Melbourne is in Australia, just as Auckland is in New Zealand, so we have to count that. So here's let me dispel a few other myths as well. We're doing really well with the pandemic here in Australia. Okay, if that's the case, remember, the only country in the world apart from North Korea that closes its borders to its citizens and prevents them from leaving, then that's already quite a barrier, right? Okay, imagine any other country that had that sort of barrier that not only limits the amount of people that can come in, but really harshly limits the amount of people that can leave. And it has to be for a really, really good reason, as I thought my reason was, okay? So when you consider all of that, count the number of days in lockdown that most of Australians have experienced, especially in the state of Victoria, then compare that to New Zealand, which has had a lockdown, and what we call a hard and fast lockdown at the very start, a very brief one not so long ago for about a few days. So the reason I'm comparing these two countries is because both countries do have a natural barrier. They are geographical fortresses, if you like. So they're surrounded by ocean. So they're quite isolated, and that's quite an advantage because there's no cross-border, land crossings like in Europe. However, all right, if that's the case, given that we have this impenetrable natural border and that we cannot leave, why are we not like New Zealand? Okay, very important fact that I should mention, and this is important, New Zealand, like almost every other country except Australia, does allow its citizens to leave. It's up to the citizen. They're warned it's not advisable to travel, and if you return, you will have to go through quarantine, and that's up to you, and you have to pay for that, etc., etc. And every New Zealander understands that. So this is a very, very unique situation that we're in here in Australia. I will be fighting this because it's not only personally insulting to be told that my job is worthless and it's not that important for the economy, but it's actually insulting for the industry that I work in, that has been hit especially hard by measures that were not our fault. So we did not slip up with hotel quarantine. We did not allow outbreaks to pop up in different cities in Australia. So we don't control the type of quarantine. Remember, the type of people that are coming into the country are not international students. They're not our people. Right, so these are returning Australian citizens who, from time to time, disobey the rules, or the people working in the hotels disobey the rules, and it spreads to the wider community. All right, not the problem or the fault of people in the education industry, yet we're suffering for this. So people like me, and my job prior to this pandemic was to be out there constantly on the road. So, 1 year later, almost 1 year, I've been very patient, as we all have, but we need to keep this industry afloat, as I said in my previous video. And when the government shuts us down like this, I want the rest of the world to see this is what we're dealing with, okay? Be very careful when you see all that sugar-coated information about countries that are doing well. Yes, New Zealand is doing well. Yes, Taiwan, South Korea apparently are doing well. These are countries that don't prevent their citizens from leaving. So I think by us here in Australia to say that we are doing well, we are cheating, because we have this extra unprecedented rule of preventing most people from leaving. And in my case, at least, I'm not on my way to a funeral or to visit a sick relative. A lot of these people, their cases have been rejected as well. So like those people who have been rejected a second time and a third time, we just have to keep trying and trying and trying. It's very frustrating. This is a situation we are in. A lot of people from other countries have been commenting and saying, we envy the situation you're in there in Australia. But bear this in mind. Okay, so it's very subjective. You might think, well, we have hundreds of thousands of cases where I am, but can you get on a plane and leave? You probably can. Okay, so there's nothing preventing if you're doing this, because this is very unusual. It's very unusual unless you're in a dictatorship to be prevented from leaving your own country, right? Think about this. For those of us who are not traveling for leisure and not coming back irresponsibly, we are like going to Mars, so to speak. It's a mission with not much of a return, especially in this year. Think about this. It's not for selfish reasons. It's not to put other people at risk. And I'm not leaving a country where there is a considerable problem with the pandemic. So I'm not taking that problem anywhere else with me. And I have to go through all of the preventative measures, from being tested to being quarantined before I leave this country and when I arrive in that place of destination. So I've covered all the what if, but but shouldn't you, blah, blah, blah. No, this is work related. It is essential, in my opinion. And I'm very defensive about people who say, shouldn't you just stay and wait? Okay, so think about it from the shoes of the colleges that I represent, from the owners of these schools who have empty seats in empty classrooms. This is my reason for leaving, and this was my reason for being rejected. So the fight continues. I'll keep you updated. I'll stop from now and speak to you next time.